kid. I'm not gonna ask you again. Out, you're loitering. Sir. I'm just sitting on the bench waiting for my ride. I've been here 20 minutes. You don't have a membership. I checked. Get up. You checked what name? Look, don't play games with me. Out, now, before I call the cops on you. The front doors swing open. Heels click across the tile. Curtis, step back from the boy, right this second. Do you have any idea who you are talking to? He was 17 years old and he was wearing a hoodie with a tiny grease stain on the sleeve. His name was Jameer Sinclair, JJ, to everyone who loved him. And he had just spent the whole morning under his grandfather's old pickup replacing a starter. And he was tired and he smelled a little like a garage. And he was sitting on a bench in the lobby of an Iron Bank fitness franchise in the town of Harborlyn waiting for his ride. He'd come in because it was raining. The man behind the counter took one look at him and decided the boy asked to sit. The man said no. The boy asked politely. The man said louder, and a whole lobby of adults on treadmills, on ellipticals in the smoothie line, looked once, looked away, and let it happen. 10 minutes later, a woman in a rainstorm walked through the front doors, and every phone in that gym came out. What she said next made a full-grown man sit down on the floor. To understand how a 17-year-old boy in a grease-stained hoodie ended up being called Sir by a regional franchise director in front of a lobby full of gym members. To understand how a kid whose whole world was his grandfather's garage came to own the very chain that had just tried to throw him out. We have to go back. Back before the bench. Back before the rain. Back to a driveway on Cedar Row in a little coastal town called Harborlyn, and to a grandmother who baked bread every Wednesday, and to a boy who learned, before his voice fully dropped, what a promise from a dying man is worth. Harborlyn was a small coastal town that made most of its money from a shrimp fleet, a tiny community college, and, in the summers, a small parade of tourists who came to buy pretzels on the boardwalk. Jameer Sinclair, JJ, was born there in a hospital that closed the year he turned 5. His mother, Denise, worked 2 jobs at a diner and a nursing home, and his father was not in the picture in any way Jameer could remember. The 2 people who raised him in the deepest sense were his grandparents on his mother's side, Wallace and Estelle Sinclair of the small white house at the end of Cedar Row. Grandpa Wallace was a body shop man from way back. He ran a 2-bay shop off Route 6 called Wallace's. No last name on the sign, no phone number, no advertising, and enough business to keep him working 60 hours a week for 40 years. He was a big, quiet man with cracked hands and a laugh you had to work for, and a slow, careful way of teaching a boy about a car. Grandma Estelle was the quiet, kind soul of Jameer's whole young world. She was small and round and warm, and she baked bread on Wednesdays, a whole loaf in an ancient pan, in the little oven that took forever to preheat. And the whole house on Cedar Row smelled like Wednesday, every Wednesday for Jameer's entire childhood. She had a laugh like a wind chime and a habit of leaving small notes for the men in her house. Wallace and Jameer, inside their lunchboxes on scraps of grocery paper, saying nothing more elaborate than "I love you today," or "You are a good boy," JJ or Wallace, "Don't forget your knee brace." Jameer kept every one of them, every single one. He had a shoebox of them under his bed by the time he was 12. She taught him 3 things that would run through his whole life. The first was that pride was cheap. "Baby," she'd say, flouring a bread pan, "pride is what they give you when they don't want to give you anything else. It's a nickel dressed up as a dollar. Don't spend your life chasing it. Chase character. Character is real money." The second was that a person's true measure was how they treated somebody who could do nothing for them. Watch how a man talks to a waitress, JJ. Watch how he talks to the boy who bags his groceries. Watch how he treats a stranger who won't ever see him again. That's the man. Not what he says at church. Not what he says at the barber shop. What he does to the person he don't have to be nice to. And the third, and this was the one Jameer carried into every corner of his adult life, was that he was allowed, at any moment, in any room, to just own the fact that he was Estelle Sinclair's grandbaby and Wallace Sinclair's boy, and that was worth as much as anybody else's whole resume. You don't ever apologize for being here, JJ, you hear me? God put you in a body and set you loose in this world, and he didn't do it as a favor to anybody who's mad about it. You walk into any room like your grandmama loves you, because she does. There was one afternoon Jameer would remember later as the thing that set the whole grammar of his life. He was 10. He'd walked to the corner store with a $5 bill from Grandma Estelle to pick up bread flour, because Wednesday was the next day and she'd run out. The clerk at the register was a red-faced man Jameer did not know, and the moment Jameer set the bag of flour on the counter, the man's whole face changed. The man looked at the bag. He looked at the 10-year-old boy. He looked at the $5 bill, and he said, loud enough for the whole store to hear, "Where'd you get this money, son?" Jameer felt his face go hot. He felt 6 other customers turn. He said in the smallest voice he could find, "My grandma gave it to me, sir." "Uh-huh. Your grandma?" "Yes, sir." "Your grandma got a name?" "Yes, sir. Estelle Sinclair." "She lives in Cedar Row." "Estelle." "Yes, sir." The man rang up the flour, took the 5, made change wrong on purpose. Jameer would spot it at home. 3 cents short, and shoved the bag across the counter without a bag. Jameer walked out into the sun with the bag of flour clutched to his chest and cried the whole 2 blocks back to Cedar Row. Not because he'd been made short 3 cents, but because 6 other grown people in that store had watched a boy be treated like a thief, and none of them had said a word. He came in the back door. Grandma Estelle took one look at his face, dried her hands on her apron, and put the flour on the counter. "Who?" she said. "Nobody, Grandma Ezekiel, Jameer Anthony Sinclair. Who?" he told her. She listened all the way through, hands still on her hips. Then she took her apron off, hung it on the peg, and put her coat on. "Come with me." They walked back to the corner store together. She did not run. She did not stomp. She walked slow, at the pace of a small, round old woman in a coat, holding her grandson's hand. And when they got to the store, she walked right up to the counter, and she looked the red-faced man square in the eye, and she said only this: "Sir, this is my grandbaby. His name is Jameer. That $5 was mine, and I gave it to him. You owe him 3 cents and an apology. He'll take the 3 cents. I don't care whether you give him the apology. That's between you and the Lord. But you will never speak to a child in my family that way again in this store, or I will spend the rest of my life telling every soul in Harbalin what you said, and I know every soul in Harbalin. Have a good afternoon." She held out her hand for the 3 cents. The red-faced man, without looking at either of them, laid 3 pennies in her palm. Grandma Estelle handed the 3 pennies to Jameer, took his hand again, and walked him home. At the kitchen table, she poured him a glass of milk and cut him a slice of the last of Wednesday's bread and sat down across from him. "Baby," she said, "I don't want you carrying that home in your body. I want you to hear me. What he did was not about you. It was about him. He is a small, sad man with a small, sad store, and he has spent his whole life deciding who people are before they open their mouth. That is not something a child fixes. That is his to carry, not yours. You hear me?" "Yes, ma'am, you look at me, JJ." She lifted his chin. "You are Estelle Sinclair's grandbaby. That is real money. That is the only currency that counts in this house. And a person who cannot see it, well, they are just too poor to see it. That's all. You feel sorry for them, and you go on." She wiped his cheek. Say it with me. I am Estelle Sinclair's grandbaby. I am Estelle Sinclair's grandbaby. Wallace Sinclair's boy. Wallace Sinclair's boy. And God put me here on purpose. And God put me here on purpose. Good. Now eat your bread. Jameer ate his bread. He would say that sentence over the years in a lot of rooms, locker rooms, classrooms, a dean's office once, a hospital corridor. Every time he said it, it was Estelle Sinclair's voice, not his own, that he heard inside his head. Grandpa Wallace taught him the trades. From the time Jameer was 6 years old, he lived in that two-bay shop after school, handing his grandpa tools, learning names, sweeping bays out for $1 a day that he saved in an old peanut can. Jameer loved that shop the way some boys love a ball field. The smell of it, the clank of the lift, the particular quiet at 6 p.m. when Grandpa Wallace would kill the compressor and roll the big bay doors down, and it felt like a whole small kingdom shutting up for the night. By the time Jameer was 12, he could rotate a set of tires, change brake pads, and swap a battery. By 15, he could pull a whole starter, which is a thing most grown men take twice as long on. And every day of every summer of his teenage years, he worked in that shop, no pay beyond pocket money, because his grandfather told him he was buying an education more valuable than most people paid for. "Boy," Grandpa Wallace would say, wiping his hands on a rag, "anybody can learn to fix a car. That's just hands. The real thing you're learning here, the real thing is how to be fair with money. A car in a shop is a lot of trust, JJ. You never charge for a thing you didn't do. You never upcharge because somebody looks like they don't know cars. You look every person square in the face, and you tell them the truth about what it costs. You do that for 40 years, and there won't be a person in this county who doesn't know your name. It's how a small business becomes a big one. Fair and slow. Fair and slow. Fair and slow." Jameer got it tattooed on his heart before it ever occurred to him to get it tattooed on his skin. But here is where the story of JJ Sinclair turns from the story of a small-town garage boy into something bigger. Grandpa Wallace's brother, Uncle Ephraim Sinclair, a man Jameer barely knew, who'd left Harbor Lynn at 18 and moved to the city and never come back except at Christmas, had, over the course of 40 years, built a fitness chain. Nothing glamorous. He'd opened a single storefront gym in a strip mall on Grover Avenue in a city called Millport when Jameer was in kindergarten, and he'd built it, one franchise at a time, into something called Iron Bank Fitness, a mid-priced, no-nonsense chain of neighborhood gyms with clean floors and honest prices, and none of the shame culture of the fancy chains. By the time Jameer was 15, Iron Bank had 140 locations across 4 states. Uncle Ephraim never had children of his own. He was a widower. He had, all his life, quietly loved his little brother Wallace back home, and he had, twice a year, driven back to Harbor Lynn to sit on the porch of the little white house on Cedar Row and eat Estelle's Wednesday bread and talk quietly with his brother about nothing. And Uncle Ephraim, twice a year, had watched Jameer grow up, had watched the boy in the two-bay shop, had watched him hand his grandfather tools, had watched him. This is the part he would tell Jameer about later. On a hard morning, count change back to a customer at the little cash box at the front of the shop, at the age of 10, slowly, honestly, saying yes, sir, and yes, ma'am, to grown men who didn't always deserve it. He had watched the boy his brother had raised, and he had, without ever saying so, made a decision. Because Uncle Ephraim knew what almost no one in Harbor Lynn knew, that he was, quietly, sick, that the doctors had given him a number he didn't tell people, and that he had, at his lawyer's office in Millport, been sitting for 3 years with a will that named a 15-year-old body shop kid from a little coastal town as the sole heir of Iron Bank Fitness. He had told no one but his lawyer, not Wallace. not Estelle, not Jameer. Uncle Ephraim died in the fall. Jameer was 15. He passed in his sleep, alone in his condo in Millport, and the family drove up for the funeral in Grandpa Wallace's old pickup truck. Jameer wore a suit that was too small for him. He remembered mostly the way his grandfather cried, silent, big shoulders shaking in the front pew. They came home. Life went on. Nobody in Harberlin knew what was in Uncle Ephraim's will yet, because the estate was complicated and slow. Then Grandma Estelle passed, 6 months after her brother-in-law. A stroke, quick and unfair, in her sleep. Grandpa Wallace held her hand in the ambulance, and then in the hospital, and then, eventually, alone in the little kitchen on Cedar Row, staring at a bread pan on the counter she would never fill again. Jameer was 16. He had never known a world without her. There were 2 lunchbox notes he never showed anybody. One from the week she died. "You are a good boy, JJ." And one from the day of her funeral that Grandpa Wallace slipped into the pocket of his too small suit without a word. "She would want you to keep being kind." 6 weeks later, Uncle Ephraim's lawyer drove down from Millport in a nice car and knocked on the front door of the little white house on Cedar Row and sat with Grandpa Wallace and a 16-year-old boy in the kitchen and read them a document that changed a great many things. Grandpa Wallace listened. He looked at Jameer. He looked at the lawyer. He said, "You mean my grandbaby now owns 140 gyms?" The lawyer said yes. Grandpa Wallace put his big cracked hands over his face for a long moment. "Jay," he said, "your Uncle Ephraim did that because he watched you count change. You understand me?" "Yes, sir." "I think so. You don't yet, but you will." They set it up carefully. Because Jameer was 16, the chain went into a trust with professional management, and Grandpa Wallace was named guardian of the trust until Jameer came of age. There was a small monthly income the trust paid out, and Grandpa Wallace, on principle, put every dollar of it in an account for Jameer's college and did not touch it. Grandpa Wallace kept running the 2-bay shop off Route 6. Jameer kept going to Harberlin High and kept working weekends and summers under trucks in the shop and kept saving pocket money in the old peanut can. And Uncle Ephraim's business kept running the way a well-built machine keeps running. And Jameer spent 1 Saturday a month, by the lawyer's request, driving up to Millport with his grandfather to sit quietly in an office and be walked through how the chain worked, meeting after meeting, so that when he came of age he would not be a stranger to what was his. He kept it absolutely to himself. He told nobody at school, nobody at church, nobody at practice. Because pride is a nickel dressed up as a dollar, and you watch how a man talks to a waitress. And Jameer Sinclair had a grandmother's voice in his ear and no interest at all in being the kid at Harberlin High who bragged. Which is why on a rainy Saturday morning in October, when Jameer Sinclair walked into the Iron Bank Fitness on Grover Avenue in Millport, the original Iron Bank Fitness, Uncle Ephraim's very first storefront, the one on the corner of a strip mall that was the seed of the entire chain, nobody in that gym had any idea who he was. He had driven up with his grandfather that morning for one of his standing monthly meetings, and his grandfather had dropped him at the strip mall while he ran an errand 2 blocks over. Jameer, 17 years old, in a plain hoodie with a tiny grease stain on the sleeve, from a starter he'd changed the day before, had walked into the original storefront just to look. He had never actually seen it in person. Uncle Ephraim had shown him the photograph once, framed in his own office, the tiny grand opening with a ribbon across the door in 2007. Jameer had wanted, quietly, to stand in the doorway of the room the whole thing had been born in. It was raining. He sat down on the lobby bench to wait for his grandpa to swing back around. He had been sitting there 20 minutes when Curtis Meade decided he was a problem. Stop and be 17 again for a second. You're a kid. You smell like a shop. You've never once in your life felt like the room you were sitting in belonged to you. And now a grown man behind a counter is standing over you, telling a whole lobby of adults you don't belong there. Do you tell him who you are? Or do you swallow it, the way you've swallowed 1,000 small things already at 17? Hold that thought. Because what Jameer did next was neither one. Curtis Meade was 38, and he had been managing the front desk at the Grover Avenue Iron Bank Fitness for 6 years. He was a former college football player who had never quite gotten over the fact that college had ended. And he ran the front desk like it was a locker room, and he was still the captain. He was loud with the regulars. He was loud with the trainers. He was loud, especially, with anyone he thought looked out of place. He had watched Jameer walk in. He'd watched him look around a beat too long. He'd watched him sit down on the bench with no gym bag, no earbuds, no phone scroll, a boy just sitting. Curtis Meade did not like anyone in his lobby who was not moving. He walked out from behind the counter and stood in front of the bench. He crossed his arms. "Hey!" Jameer looked up. "Hi, sir. What are you doing here?" "I'm just waiting on a ride, sir. It's raining." "Are you a member?" "No, sir." "Then you can't be here." "Sir, I've been here 20 minutes. Nobody said anything. Yeah, that's on me for not clocking you sooner." Curtis stepped closer, taking up his space the way a big man does when he wants a small person to feel smaller. "Members only in the lobby, kid. You don't have a bag. You don't have gear. What are you doing? Are you chasing the place?" Jameer blinked. "Am I what? Look, don't play games with me. Up. Out. Wait outside. Sir, it's raining. My grandpa is going to be here in. Not my problem, kid." Curtis's voice had gone loud, deliberately, so the treadmill row could hear him. "You look like you don't belong. That's my job, to keep the lobby clean. You want to sit down someplace? Sit down at the bus stop across the parking lot. This is a place of business." A few of the treadmill rows were heard. A few of them looked over. A few of them, seeing what it was, looked away. The smoothie counter girl, a college kid named Perry, froze mid-blend, her stomach going cold. A woman on the elliptical closest to the counter, a mother in her 40s in expensive workout gear, with a phone in the little cup holder, pulled her earbud out and turned her head, and for a second her whole face said something. Her mouth even opened. And then she looked at Curtis, and she looked at the boy, and she looked at the way her elliptical time was ticking down, and she put the earbud back in. That's how it always works. It doesn't take much to keep a lobby quiet. It just takes people already deciding, before they've thought about it, that their small comfort is worth more than a stranger's dignity. Jameer stood up, slow. He was 17. He was tired. He had his grandmother's voice in his ear. He was not going to fight this man in this lobby. "Sir," he said, quiet, polite, all the manners Estelle Sinclair had drilled into him standing up in his voice-like posture. "I'm not here to make trouble. I'll go wait outside. I'm just gonna text my grandpa where I am. You'll wait outside now." "Yes, sir, I'm going." He bent to pick up the little backpack he'd set by his feet. Curtis, over his shoulder, said loud enough for the whole lobby, "And leave the backpack open. I want to see what's in it before you go." Jameer straightened up, slow. He looked at Curtis Meade. "Sir, there's a wrench and a torque driver in this bag from my grandpa's shop, and a granola bar. You want to see? I'll open it right here on the counter for you. I'd rather do that than have you tell people later I stole something." Curtis's ears went red. He had not expected the boy to offer. He'd expected the boy to argue, or to comply while shrinking, and either would have felt like winning. He hadn't expected this, A 17-year-old kid quietly refusing to give him the shape of scene he wanted. Just get out of here." "Yes, sir." Jameer zipped the backpack closed, put it on one shoulder and walked to the door. His shoulders were straight. His face did not show a thing, but Curtis Meade, who could not stand a polite kid the way some men cannot stand a polite kid, decided to take one more shot as Jameer walked away. And "Hey," he called after him, loud, so the whole lobby couldn't miss it. "You come back here without a membership, I'm calling the cops. You feel me? This isn't your gym." Jameer stopped. For 1 second, the sentence just hung in the air. "This isn't your gym." If Grandma Estelle had heard it, she'd have laughed. The wind chime laugh, and she'd have said, "Baby, don't tell him. Don't tell him. Let the Lord tell him." Something in him, some small quiet thing his grandmother had taught him, about how a person is allowed to just own the fact God had set him loose in the world, clicked into place. He turned around. He looked at Curtis Meade. He did not raise his voice. He said one sentence, very carefully. "Sir, I hear you. I'm going. But I do want you to remember later on today that you said those exact words." He walked out into the rain. That's what he did. That was the whole confrontation from him. He walked into the rain with his hood up and stood under the eave outside the door and texted his grandfather, and his grandfather texted back that he was 3 minutes out. And 2 of those 3 minutes was all it took for the story to change. Because Perry at the smoothie counter, who had been holding a smoothie blender frozen in her hand the whole exchange, put the blender down and did something she'd never quite done in her 4 months at Iron Bank. She called the regional office. She said, "Something just happened here. It was ugly. I want somebody who is not Curtis to know about it before he tells his version." She said it in a calm voice, and the regional office listened. And the regional office called the regional franchise director on her cell phone. The regional franchise director was a woman named Renata Cho. She was 41, sharp as a set of freshly sharpened knives, and she had, that morning, been on her way to the Grover Avenue location anyway, because there was a scheduled meeting on the books for the Iron Bank Fitness Board of Directors at 11 a.m. in the little back office of the original store on the anniversary of Ephraim Sinclair's death, which the trust honored every year. The board of directors of Iron Bank Fitness was, at that moment, sitting in Renata's SUV in a rainstorm across the parking lot from the Grover Avenue store, waiting for the guest of honor, a 17-year-old kid, to arrive with his grandfather from the diner 2 blocks over. Renata was checking her phone one last time before she went in. That's when the call came from her regional office. That's when she was told what had just happened in her lobby to a boy in a hoodie with a grease stain. Renata Cho, who had known exactly who her 17-year-old boss was for 2 years, went very, very still. Then she picked up the door handle of her SUV and stepped out into the rain in high heels and started walking fast toward the front doors of the store, phone to her ear, telling 3 separate people to be ready. She hit the front doors just as Jameer's grandfather's old pickup pulled into the parking lot beside her. The doors of the Grover Avenue Iron Bank Fitness swung open with a bang. Every head in the lobby turned. Renata Cho, hair plastered to her forehead, jacket dark with rain, high heels clicking on the tile, crossed that lobby fast and stopped in front of Curtis Meade at the counter. "Step back from the counter right this second. Do you have any idea who you are talking to?" Curtis stared at her. "Renata? What are you? Where is the boy? Kid in the hoodie, I put him outside. You put a 17-year-old outside in the rain." Her voice cracked. "Curtis, get out from behind that counter right now. Come around here." Curtis, confused, came around. The whole lobby was frozen. Two treadmill runners had stopped running. The smoothie counter girl, Perry, was already crying quietly from relief. The front doors opened again. In stepped a big older man in a barn jacket, his shirt buttoned all the way up, his hands cracked and clean. Grandpa Wallace, and behind him, hood down now, water dripping off his hair, 17-year-old Jameer Sinclair, looking around at the lobby with the mild, surprised eyes of a kid whose day had just gotten strange. Renata Cho, a woman who had spent 2 years in Zoom meetings addressing a teenager as Mr. Sinclair out of the corner of a screen, watching him take notes with a chewed-up pencil while his grandfather sat quietly beside him, turned to face him and did the only thing she could think to do. She straightened up. She smoothed her wet jacket, and she said out loud to the whole lobby, "Mr. Sinclair, I am so sorry. On behalf of Ironbank Fitness, of which you are, of course, the majority owner and the beneficiary of your late uncle's trust, I want to apologize to you personally for whatever just happened in this lobby. I will make it right. Please, come in out of the rain." The whole lobby stopped breathing. Curtis Meade said, "I'm sorry." Renata turned on him. "Curtis, this is Jameer Sinclair, Ephraim Sinclair's grandnephew. The boy your late founder left this entire company to. The kid who owns the store you work in, the chair you sit in, and the paycheck in your account." Her voice was steely. "The kid you just called a loiterer and threatened to call the cops on. Curtis Meade, a big man, a former college football player, 6'3", sat down on the floor of his own lobby. Just sat down. His knees went right out. The woman on the elliptical, the mother in expensive workout gear who had pulled her earbud out and then put it back in, pulled it out again. This time she did not put it back. She was watching the way you watch a house fire you thought you could ignore. Perry at the smoothie counter had already begun to cry, silent, both hands on the counter. Two men on the treadmills had stopped walking, and one of them had, without meaning to, said out loud, "Oh my God." Phones came out all over the lobby. It was the phones later that made the story a story. Jameer stood in the doorway, water dripping off him, and for a second said absolutely nothing. He looked at Renata Cho. He looked at Curtis on the floor. He looked at his grandfather, who was watching him carefully. Grandpa Wallace, from the doorway behind him, made no move. He just watched. His big cracked hands were in the pockets of his barn jacket. His face said nothing. But Jameer knew that face better than he knew his own, knew exactly what it was saying without saying it. "Whatever you do here, JJ, will be who you are. Choose carefully." Then Jameer Sinclair, 17 years old, did the thing his grandmother had raised him to do. He walked, quiet, across the lobby, and he crouched down beside Curtis Meade, and he put his hand on the man's shoulder, and he said gently, "Sir, it's all right. Get up. You don't have to sit on the floor. That's not what my grandmama would want either of us to do." The whole lobby lost it. People started crying. Perry at the smoothie counter had her hand over her mouth. Two grown men on the treadmills were wiping their eyes on their sleeves. The woman with the earbuds actually sat down, on her elliptical, and covered her face. Curtis Meade looked up at a 17-year-old kid he had 10 minutes earlier put out in the rain. Curtis Meade's own eyes filled up. I'm so sorry, kid. I mean, sir. I'm so sorry." "Get up," Jameer said, warm. "Come on, get up." Curtis got up, slowly, on knees that didn't want to hold him. Jameer kept the hand on his shoulder the whole way up, steady, the way you'd help a much older man up off a floor. Renata Cho, watching, understood at that moment exactly why Ephraim Sinclair had left this entire company to a boy from Harborlin who counted change back to grown men. She stepped forward. She addressed the lobby, because the lobby, whether it liked it or not, was part of what came next. "Everyone," Renata said, and her voice, though she tried to steady it, cracked a little. I want to apologize to every one of you, too. What just happened in this lobby is not who Iron Bank Fitness is trying to be. It is my job to make sure it doesn't happen again in any of our stores. If you took video, please do not take it down. Send it to us. We want to see all of it. Nothing gets fixed in the dark. Nobody in that lobby ever went back to their treadmill that morning. Curtis Meade was, in the end, not fired. He should have been. Renata was ready to. The board was ready to. The trust's lawyers were pointing at 3 sections of the employee handbook at once. Curtis had earned it, but Jameer asked quietly, in the little back office after the lobby had cleared, that he not be. "Miss Cho," he said, and his voice was the mild, respectful voice his grandmother had trained into him. "My grandma used to say the measure of a man is how he treats somebody who can't do anything for him. Well, Mr. Meade did his measure today, and it wasn't good. But I don't think you fix a person like that by throwing them out. I think you fix a person like that by putting them in a room with the very thing they couldn't see and making them look." He glanced up at Renata. "I'd like you to move him, not fire him. Move him. Somewhere he has to see people all day the way he couldn't see me." Renata looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Yes, sir." Curtis Meade was reassigned. He was moved out of the front desk of the flagship Grover Avenue store and into a new role Iron Bank Fitness quietly created in the following months. A full-time community outreach coordinator whose job was to run free membership programs for teenagers, veterans, and after-school kids across the whole regional cluster. It was not a promotion. It was not a punishment. It was a mirror, held up to a man who had needed one, and Curtis Meade, because sometimes the world does surprise you, grew into that mirror. He was, 5 years later, one of the most quietly respected people in the entire chain, and every year, on the anniversary of the rainstorm morning, he wrote Jameer a letter that Jameer never showed to anybody but Grandpa Wallace. Jameer Sinclair, at 18, took his seat formally on the board. He did what Uncle Ephraim, from wherever he was watching, had wanted him to do. He did not try to run the company. He was 17, and then 18, and then 19. And he knew what he did not know. What he did was insist on 2 things. The first was that every single new franchise application would, from that year forward, include an interview with the applicant's own community about how they treated people who had no leverage over them. Uncle Ephraim would have liked that. The second was that a piece of the trust's monthly income go, every month, to a scholarship, the Estelle Sinclair Kitchen Table Scholarship, for kids from small coastal towns who wanted to go into small business, not into the fancy tracks, not into finance or law, into small business like a two-bay shop or a diner or a corner bakery. Kids who wanted to build the kind of small, honest thing his grandmother had believed in. The scholarships weren't huge, they were enough. They came with 2 things, a small check and a laminated card in Grandma Estelle's own handwriting, copied from one of the notes in Jameer's shoebox. "You are a good child. Be fair, be slow, and be kind to the person who cannot do anything for you." Jameer went to the little community college in Harbor Lynn, then transferred up to Millport. He did not move into a fancy apartment. He lived in a walk-up above a diner and worked weekends at his grandfather's tuba shop because Grandpa Wallace, at 71, still didn't want to close it, and because his grandson, at 20, still liked the smell of it. Grandpa Wallace lived long enough to see the first Estelle Sinclair scholarship handed to a 19-year-old girl from 3 towns over who wanted to open a bakery. He sat in the second row at that ceremony, and Jameer handed the girl the check, and Grandpa Wallace cried like a small boy, quiet, big shoulders shaking. And Jameer walked over and hugged his grandfather in the middle of a small ceremony room, and did not care one bit who saw. The girl's name was Marisol, and she was so nervous her hand shook when she took the check. Jamir, sensing it, leaned in and said, so only she could hear, "Ma'am, read that laminated card first. Then look at the check. My grandmama wrote it. Kind of. Read it every morning while you're building your bakery. Trust me." Marisol read the card in the parking lot, alone, sitting in her mother's car, and cried for 10 minutes before she could turn the key. 2 years later, when the doors opened on her little bakery on the coast, its name was Estelle's because she'd asked Jamir if she could, and he'd said yes and then had had to leave the room. Jamir sent her a note in Grandma Estelle's exact careful handwriting, copied off yet another lunchbox scrap he'd kept in his shoebox. It said only, "Be fair, be slow, and feed the person who cannot pay you today. She will bring you 3 tomorrow." Marisol had that note laminated too, and put it above her mixer. That is how it works. In the family Estelle Sinclair built notes on scraps of paper, small kindnesses on laminated cards. A woman's plain handwriting outliving her by decades, going into other people's kitchens, teaching them how to be fair and slow, and on the wall of the tiny back office of the original Grover Avenue Iron Bank Fitness, the room where Uncle Ephraim had started the whole thing, Jamir Sinclair, at 19, hung 2 things. The first was the framed photograph from 2007 of a smiling old man cutting a ribbon. The second was a small, faded, folded scrap of grocery paper framed under glass. In a woman's careful handwriting, "You are a good boy, JJ. Every trainer, every clerk, every regional director, every employee of Iron Bank Fitness who ever stepped into that back office had to walk past those 2 frames. Renata Cho made sure of it. She would tell the new hires, gently, when they asked, 'That paper on the wall is why we exist. Read it. Then go do your job like she wrote it about you. So here's what I want you to sit with tonight.'" They looked at a kid in a hoodie and decided on the whole boy. They looked at a grease stain on a sleeve and decided the whole story. And they were wrong about every single thing that mattered, including who owned the room they were standing in, how many JJ's have you walked past today? What did you decide about them before they said a word? If this story got a hold of you, do 3 things right now. Drop a comment and tell me. Who taught you what it means to be a good boy or a good girl? Share this video with someone who's ever been told they didn't belong in a lobby they were about to inherit. And subscribe and turn on notifications so the next story finds you, because you don't own the room, you just cleaned it. And the boy on the bench? He probably owns the building. And the woman who taught him to be kind to the person who cleaned it, she owns the bench. Say her name. Say your grandma's name. Say your mama's name. Say the name of the woman who taught you that a person's worth cannot be read off their sleeve. Say it out loud. Somebody up there is listening, and somebody down here on a bench somewhere is waiting to be seen. Don't be the one who walks past.